of spectrum and how we can make it much easier. I'd like to welcome on board Andrew Conway while everyone else drops off. Andrew, nice to see you again. It's been some time, I think, since we last had your team on Uptime. So it's really great to get this update from you. I think what's really fascinating to have you is, since you last spoke, is the acquisition you made in the US as well. So you're a player now who straddles the Atlantic, both in Europe and in the US. So it's interesting to get your perspective. If I recall, there's 130 networks that you have, private networks that you have deployed. I mean, these are fully segregated networks, not slices or anything, but proper MPNs as we would recognize them. So really excited to hear from you in terms of, what's been the story from 2020 to now in terms of deployment, what's been the roadblocks, what's unblocked, and where do you see us going over the next decade? So over to you,
Nanda. Thank you very much, Nanda. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone on the call. I'm just now going to share my screen, and hopefully you will be able to see that. If that's a thumbs up from Nanda.
Yeah, all good.
Great. Okay, so the tech is working. That's super. So thank you for the intro. I'm going to talk today really about private networks as sort of like critical infrastructure in their own right, crucial for what I would say time sensitive and mission critical environments. And I will touch upon a lot of what Nanda said as well in terms of like where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going. So I'm really delighted, to be here today on the Uptime event about how private networks really are transforming real life operations. I think we've moved, now from trials and POCs into proper production, and we see it particularly in Boldyn in environments where reliability, security, and low latency are, really non-negotiable. So yes, my name's Andrew Conway. I'm the CTO for Europe in Boldyn Networks, and I'll just take you today through a couple of real-life use cases. There's also a little video or two within the deck, which I shall endeavour to share. But just to give you a flavour, really, of the solutions that private networks enable and use cases where, as the title says, every second counts. So, of course, no pitch would be complete without a little corporate advertorial, and here it is from our perspective. Who are Boldyn Networks? In the same, we're not a household name, but we are one of the largest neutral host providers in the world. So for us, it's all about shared network infrastructure. And this kind of graphic here just sort of like captures all of the things we do, as well as private networks, which I'm going to double down upon. So we're present in 3 continents, as Nanda mentioned. So the US, UK, and Europe, and also an entity in Hong Kong. And we've got about 1,200 employees globally. I think one interesting factoid about Boldyn is that we are sort of majority owned, practically in its entirety, by the Canadian pension plan, CPPIB, who've got like a huge kind of funding structure. But that's important for us as well. It really drives the way that the company looks at digital assets and digital investment. I recall when I joined the company and I met some senior executives, and they said to me, Andy, when we talk quarters, we mean quarters of a century. And so really that's sort of like being our compass. We like long-term complex projects, mission critical projects. And you'll see there on the infographic, really our heritage before private networks, I would say, we started out really in transit networks. So we've got 6 major transit systems now worldwide. But yeah, one that's close to my heart that I bid on earlier on is the Transport for London case, where we design, build, and operate over a 25-year concession for TfL, the 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G DAS system on the London Underground. We have a similar system in New York. We're also present in San Francisco, and more recently Rome. And really, that was the heritage of the company. We underwent an extensive rebrand as we brought companies together, and for the past couple of years now, we've been known as Boldyn Networks. I would say we have a very large kind of heritage in the US, particularly in the venue space, and you'll see there a picture of a stadium. But we've got 300 plus venues there, again, where we deployed both DAS and Wi-Fi for the carriers across so like a vast array of sporting venues. Also interesting to note, we had an acquisition in the States 2 years ago, Apogee, where we actually roll out really complex Wi-Fi systems, again to over 300 plus higher education campuses, some huge universities and learning campuses there in the US. We also have an acquisition in the States, Signal Point there now under the Boldyn flag, where we've got over 80 US military bases, 82 actually, and these are kind of really size of small cities in the States, where we supply fiber and Wi-Fi connectivity to service personnel and their family. Last but not least, up there in the right quadrant, we're here today to talk about the private networks that we're especially proud of, and I'll just give a little bit more flavor to the private networks. So as I said at the start, private networks for us, they're not experimental, they're not a lab thing. They're here, they're alive, they're proven, and they are absolutely running in critical operations today across Europe, the UK, and the US. So we've got over 130 implementations to date, both 4G and increasingly, well, actually, all of the new ones now are 5G. The strongest kind of referenceability really is in Europe and the UK, the European mainland, with our private networks practice, with its regional HQ in Finland, and then we've started to grow and create a practice organically in the USA to attack the PN opportunity there. And then last but not least, since we last spoke within this environment, just approximately a year ago, we also acquired SML Smart Mobile Labs in Munich as well, to deepen and enhance our presence in Germany. That's been rebranded now as Boldyn Germany. So 130 private networks and counting. So, I think from our perspective, our hypothesis, in a way, is that there are big gaps in connectivity, in industrial connectivity, and we have a lot of kind of use cases now that are bubbling away. But all of those technologies that we'll talk about, those cases that we talk about in a bit, they require a reliable, stable, secure connection that's available across the site. And right now, in many environments, that foundation simply does not exist. So not being too technical today, because we've got a very wide audience, but this kind of like graphic here shows the difference between like a public network, a shared national network, where you might get a little bit. We'll talk about slicing maybe a bit later on, but you'll get a little chunk of that highway, that lane, or you go down the private network routes, which is having a dedicated frequency. And this sort of like little chart here that we put together, I'm quite proud of it. It's advanced PowerPoint, is really sort of like showing how you're moving around perhaps on the a Wi-Fi system that and love, But our view is, and we're real advocates of Wi-Fi in the right environment, in the higher ed space, in the enterprise space. But simply put, the Wi-Fi collapses under load and interference, and it struggles with handovers. So mission critical sites, don't rely on Wi-Fi. You need that private 5G, interference-free lane, which is really purpose-built for mission critical applications. So I think now really onto the use cases. So we sort of see that there's 5 ways really that private networks and the use cases, how they're adopted. There are 5 key drivers from our perspective. So driver number 1 is that great word, digital transformation. But I'm an advocate of the phrase digital transformation. Anything that can be digitized is digitized, is being digitized. And this industry 4.0 is absolutely on the rise. And we've got like a bunch of stats here from various industry sources about the predicted growth in particular areas, whether that's kind of like autonomous vehicles within a industrial environment, digital twins, or AR, VR. But there's more enterprises, they're getting digitized, and they need that rock solid connectivity. So that's the first driver from our perspective. I think the next one really is around operational efficiency, super important. And so there are cases, in factories and in refineries and so on, where predictive maintenance, for example, would be one sort of like key area. It's one of the biggest value drivers that we see, and that can really massively cut costs. We're saying here, this is a source from McKinsey, up to 30%. It can reduce breakdowns, and it does increase equipment uptime. So I think the second big driver from us is private networks enabling operational efficiency. That's why they're deployed. The third one, of course, a big card, really, the safety and security card. Okay, it's a private network. More often than not, they're air-gapped from the outside world, from the internet. The 5G radio interface and the encryption protocols inherently secure. So we are seeing a lot of cases where you have that enhanced safety and security. So if that's at an oil refinery or at an airport, again that type of connectivity is, as we said earlier on, practically non-negotiable. The fourth out of the 5th driver is sustainability. 5G networks themselves are inherently more efficient, but more importantly, the 5G private network itself is a sort of key enabler for any ESG and net zero strategies, particularly across a venue or a factory where you're installing sensors or guiding autonomous vehicles and pallets. So again, we're sort of like seeing a number of numbers there from external studies in terms of reduction of emissions, and we think that kind of sustainability piece is so important. And then the fifth and final thing really is the business continuity. You want that guaranteed capacity, that guaranteed coverage, and then as the previous panelists mentioned and alluded to as well, you then need that kind of level 1 support, that level 2 wrap, and that level 3 wrap when things go wrong. And you need that for the mission critical cases, obviously that 24/7, 365 service wrap. It's always on. That's the key, and that essentially will offer you your 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines, and it's a real big driver, I think, in terms of the use case adoption. So now on to some real world examples. I think we've got 4 here on the slide. So at the top there on the ship, we've got in Finland here. These are actually all Finnish cases, so I seem to be Finnish biased this morning. There's the port of Kokkola, and so that's using a private network really to remotely manage alarms and sensors and cranes. That's a key use case for us. Boldyn on the top right, I'll talk about that in a minute. I've got a very short 1-minute video on the sort of mining case, not Boldyn per se, but the future mine at Kallio. There you'll also see airports. We'll be talking more about airports at Mobile World Congress. That's a network that we've supplied to Finavia in Helsinki for the airport there, and that's very much connectivity for marshalling services, marshal vehicles and cars and buses around the apron of the airport to improve safety. And then one of the ones that we're most proud of, we talked about it recently in Brussels, and again I've got a short 1-minute video, is the Oulu University Hospital, where we're using the 5G private network, but this time really it's about data visualization. So bringing the 5G network into patient wards, and also for, sort of like a European first, into live surgical theatres. And then by using wearable technologies, where the health professionals being able to call up data in an instant. And as I say, I've got a video about that just now. So I'll see now if the tech works, and over to the video.
Imagine I'm removing a brain tumor. I'm able to visualize the operating field perfectly with excellent illumination and magnification.
I think the biggest impact for doctors and nurses is that they can access that data easily, and they can see that specific information what they want to see in that point.
I don't need to take my eyes off the patient. And all this is enabled by this 5G technology.
I strongly believe that we need here in hospital capable, secure, private 5G network. It's not just nice to have, it's a necessity. I'm excited about our Hola 5G own project because it's opening totally new world for healthcare.
Okay, so that was just a 1-minute sort of overview of the University Hospital of Oulu. And then the next one that I alluded to as well is a really interesting one. It's Europe's, or one of Europe's deepest mines. I think someone was telling me the other day that it's deeper than 5 Eiffel Towers stacked end to end. So that's your useful pub quiz fact for today. But this is a customer story around the future mine in Kallio and the role that our 5G private network is playing.
It's dark. It might be sometimes dangerous.
Underground mines
that's why we need
extremely challenging environments for connectivity.
In Kallio, we are proving that with the right technology, the mines can be fully operated from the surface. Worker safety was the biggest driver behind this project.
This is one of the deepest known places in Europe, and having that combined with private 5G connection, we really have the perfect testing ground.
It's a vision for a future of smarter, safer, and more sustainable mining.
Okay, slight tech glitch there, but back on track. So that, hopefully that's provided you kind of like high-level view from a customer's perspective, really, as to how these networks are being used in the wild. So, okay, I think the first thing is, so how you take those and how you sort of like deliver them in practice, the so-called blueprint for adoption. And I think the first thing to say is, as a technologist, this is a strange thing for me to say, but to start with the business outcomes, it's not about technology at all, really. It's about forging that client relationship and that understanding. I think that's really key. Understanding what problems they're trying to solve, what type of mobility is sort of like being taken care of, and what data is to be carried, and how much of it in real time. So it's not about tech at all. It's about solving the business problem. I'm sure you've heard that a lot before. And then the other thing is how private is private, really, in terms of does the system need to be air gapped, and then particularly a lot of care, I would say, through device ecosystem, the sensors, and how much resilience is required in the network. We have use cases from, as we've shown, from hospitals to mines to ports to airports. Each one of them has a different requirement in terms of latency and throughput, and how much local control is needed. And then finally, really, in the adoption blueprint, it's choosing someone like ourselves, or someone else that can deliver that solution end to end, can either advise on the spectrum or get it on behalf of the customer. And then it's really about design, high-level design and low-level design, staging the equipment, configuring the equipment, and deploying it on site, getting it accepted, and then handing it over to service ops and managing that life cycle, really, then with the customer through our care managers. That's it in a nutshell, how you would adopt and deliver the use cases that we've just talked about. So coming to a close now, as we sort of like hit towards the top of the hour. Our hypothesis is that private networks are here. They've moved out of the lab, out of the proof of concepts. We have a number of large and industrial cases, and that in their own right, really, they are the new critical infrastructure to power the next decade of innovation. It's horses for courses. Yes, there's Wi-Fi technology out there, as well as 5GPN. There's also MNO networks and slices thereof. All I would say is that if you need that rock solid reliability and security, then I think this is a clear choice. I think on this final slide, what I would do, because I'm super aware that we've got a wide ecosystem of customers, suppliers, and SIs on the call. But it's also, in advance of Mobile World Congress, a bit of a call to arms, I would say, across the community. I think three key messages really from me is that, as an ecosystem, we must stay business outcome driven. The amount of calls that I am on, not just externally, but internally, where we're, in the weeds on the protocol stacks, as fascinating as that is, and as essential as that is, ultimately, customers don't care. It's about providing those business outcomes. So I think that's the first thing I would say as a call to arms across the ecosystem. The second message really would be, device manufacturers must accelerate private 5G devices and sensors. Without that, we won't unlock as rapidly as we need to more use cases and the return on investment. And I would say that suppliers must treat private networks, as a final point, as core industrial mission critical infrastructure. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what we do at Boldyn. We bring all of those layers together that we've talked about to deliver these safety critical, resilient, high performing networks. So as we head up to the top of the hour.
Well, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
I just one question before we move on to the next thing. You're across so many different verticals, and one of the issues that or one of the differentiating factors about private 5G is that you're moving more into OT, operational technology, rather than IT. So to what extent does domain knowledge, domain expertise, how do you deal with if you're going into mining ports, etc., the use cases are very unique, very different. How do you deal with that as Boldyn?
It is, it is a real challenge, because you do need that domain mastery. So we don't profess to be experts in every single vertical. I think you have to choose with care, and you essentially need specialized local staff that can speak the language, or at least get to know intimately the client and really understand those business problems. So it's classic what I would call solutioneering. In a way, yes, there's the 5G as 5G network is a product, yes, in its own right. But I mean, there is a lot of customization and understanding really what the client wants. So I think it's knowing where to point your finite resources, and then make sure that they're speaking to the right people. So there's this key event today on private networks, but you'll find a lot of our sales force and sales staff in domain-specific events, at port events or airports and so on, getting to know the client base and really trying, understanding their problems.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Andrew. That's been very enlightening for the 5 key drivers of private 5G. We'll remember that. And with that, I'd like to thank you and invite Dean and the next panel on board. So we've got Dean and Alex in our boardroom, and we should have Mansoor joining as well, and we should have Stephen.
Hi, Nanda, can you enable our video?
Yeah.
Fabulous. Who does? It's not. It says the host has to.
Host has to enable your video. Okay, 1 second.
So we're dealing with both not so much radio interference as audio interference and feedback effects, which is why we're in different parts of the same building here. Hi, Mansoor. You
should be.
No, we can hear you and see you very well.
Yeah, we can hear you and see you. Excellent.
Right.
Super. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dean.
Great, thank you, Nanda. So I'm Dean Bubley. I'm an industry analyst and advisor, and I realized that I've been covering small cells and private networks for about 25 years, and it's quite a scary number. And actually, we're at this panel is looking at private networks in the UK. And actually, we're exactly 20 years since the first licensing of spectrum for private networks with what was called the low power GSM licenses in 2006, where there was like 2-3 megahertz chunks of spectrum, the DEC-GARB band, that had a whole bunch of like low power applications. And that was one of the first spectrum policies designed to drive use of private cellular. And since then, the UK, along with other countries like Germany and US and elsewhere, has been at the forefront of allocating spectrum for enterprises and other use cases. And indeed, I was looking today at the new government strategic priorities document on telecoms and spectrum, and there's a big emphasis there on spectrum sharing and the use of AI for that. So what I'd like to do today is to get our panelists, firstly, to introduce themselves. You've already seen Mansoor and Stephen today, but I'll have quickly sort of get their views on where they sit in terms of sort of particularly UK private networks. And then I'd also like to introduce Matt Stagg and Alex Smith as well. So I'm going to start with Alex, as he's here and I'm on mic.
Hi, Alex Smith. I'm Vice President of Product Management at Antevia Networks. We founded the company about 2021. Myself, Simon, and a couple of other guys, and here to talk today about the state of 5G private networks in the UK.
And Antevia, what exactly do you do in that context?
Well, we've pulled together an architecture, a platform, if you like. We call it 5G Shift. It's based on ORAN specifications, but we've extracted out of ORAN all the stuff that the MNOs put in there because they need it, and we've left what the enterprises really need. Yeah. So it's an enterprise-focused platform. It includes interestingly includes the front-haul multiplexer technology that's defined in ORAN that creates shared cells, so sometimes referred to as supercells and this sort of thing. Yeah.
Excellent.
That allows us to provide an end-to-end 5G private network that's really simple to buy, simple to install, simple to operate, and that's what we're all about.
All right, thank you. And the other additional speaker here is Matt Stagg, who I think you're representing Neutral Wireless today, I believe. Although I know you from previous incarnations at BT Sport and other parts of the telecoms industry.
Yeah. Thank you, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining, and especially nice to see you, Mansoor. We've worked together many years ago when we were working on the 4G rollout. So, and I guess that's part of where I come from. After we rolled out 4G, I went in to look at the media and entertainment aspects of that. And then I was working with the sports industry because of the rise in live sports, the complexity to deliver that over mobile networks. And then when 5G came around, it was really okay. We had as a broadcast industry, we had a perfect use case. We needed to work in a stadium or an event, have a guaranteed bandwidth. We needed to have uplink bias from cameras or sensors, which was complex, and we needed, underpinned with an SLA really. I went to BT Sports and subsequently Warner Brothers, looking at their strategy for mobile, both on the contribution side and then looking at augmented reality, things like that on the fan experience. And now with Neutral Wireless, who I have known for many years, we did the first live broadcast over private 5G, looking at strategy and partnerships and really going into the next phase of growth.
Great, thank you very much. So actually, Stephen, quick one for you then. I'll bring Mansoor, I'll bring you in a second as well. Is from your perspective, what do you notice about the UK market for private networks compared to elsewhere?
Excellent question. Thanks, Dean. So there was a flurry, let's wind the clock back, about 2020, 2021 of DCMS style projects. So they had this roadmap and strategy for trying to kickstart this new era of private networks. So the spectrum was available freshly. Various hopefuls came up and built networks. And some of those were greatly successful and we powered, in fact, I think more than half of those. And many still live today, running even after their trials were kind of successful, made it to the mainstream. But then, of course, come the commercial players. People are saying, that's very good. We don't need taxpayer money to subsidize this. We can do this. Actually, it'll stand on its own legs. So that's the interesting part from us is where's the real market, where the people actually need to deliver the things. We find, again, it's integrator-led. That people will find they have the custom base, the need, the requirement. The integrators have put together the solutions, and they vary hugely. In the UK alone, we have delivered everything from sports, festivals, broadcast. We've done smart manufacturing. Sony's factories, for example, in Wales, are all powered by our 5G robots running around the factory with HD uplinks off the robots, and all sorts of other clever stuff. So it's varied. There's no one application. We've even done agri-tech in Northern Ireland and other parts of the UK as well.
Okay, great, thank you, Mansoor. Obviously, you're not based in the UK at the moment, but you were quite sort of instrumental in setting things up when you were at OFCOM. Give us a little bit of your perspective on what made you make the decisions you did.
And first of all, apologies for all the sun in my room. I know it's quite painful to see that from the UK. Yeah. And it's great to see some old friends here. And Dean, it must be 7 years since you had that workshop with OFCOM.
Yeah.
I remember very vividly, and your great future thinking, and you haven't aged a bit. Matt, however, you haven't aged, but your shirts are less colorful than you used to be. You one color. But I'm
very thankful for Zoom's filtering. The video processing has improved since then. But yeah,
and effectively, I was BT&E with Matt, and then I was OFCOM in kind of a pivotal year in 2019, which I really enjoyed, and then I was exiled
because the private 5G didn't take off as fast as we wanted. And I've been told I can't come back to the UK until we have 50,000 networks in the UK. So this is personally important to me. And since then, I've been actually, it's interesting because I was 4 years working on smart cities in NEOM and effectively on emerging technologies. And all of the use cases that are being discussed for 6G, we were actually focused on developing those use cases. So it was quite interesting. Then I was back in the Philippines for a year, and now I'm back in action in Spain.
But going back to 2019, I mean, did you have a particular sort of vision, because around the 3.8 to 4.2 were you expecting it to be driven by manufacturing? Was it sort of industrial policy, or was it more sort of build it and let them come type scenario?
That's a really great question, and first of all, I have to acknowledge Philip Marnick and Christina Data, who are the real drivers behind this. And I gave my insights on the wider ecosystem. So they were really driving this. But first of all, just a few comments on that. First of all, people look at individual bands, whereas from the regulator perspective, you have to look at managing everything. And that band, the 3.8 to 4.2 in the UK wasn't fit for licensing nationally. So we couldn't do that because of interference with some satellite stations and other areas, which meant it was very patchy. We looked at CBRS in the US and we saw what they were doing, but they had a very different situation where it was mainly the Navy that were using it. Yeah. So it was the coastal areas that they needed to carve out, and then the rest was pretty homogenous. In the UK, being patchy, there's not much we could do with it. So it was a perfect ground, firstly, to start with looking at licensing it locally. Also, device compatibility was really important because we knew that it was also being adopted by CBRS and other things, so the devices would be there. And the main goal was really to allow a low-cost, rapid licensing scheme to enable not only third parties, but also equipment suppliers like Stephen here, and build that ecosystem. On the wider perspective, this was also the time we were doing the Huawei review and the supply chain review, and we knew that we needed to kind of have a model that would allow new players in the ecosystem to develop. That would take 10, 15 years. That was always very clear for us. But we felt that the way in was through private networks because it's less of a risk for customers to start off working with new suppliers. So all of that really came into account. I think if I was to look at my regrets from that time, and what we did was, I think the power, we were too restrictive on the power. But apart from that, I think it was quite forward looking at the time, and we can see that still in some countries in Europe don't have that type of capability yet.
No, and I think one of the things that the UK and US are quite good at now is iterating on the rule sets and becoming slightly less conservative over time. I've seen that with CBRS and also some of the rule changes and the discussions. People looking at directionality as well as power. So hopefully I think one of the things I have in mind is that spectrum management over time should iterate. Whilst you obviously don't want to be changing bands all the time, you can adjust the rules. If you've got something like a database-driven system, whether it's a SAS or an AFC or something, you can actually.
Well, we have an example of that now in the UK, just happening right now, where that band in the I think it's a 2300 thing was shared access license. Now it's also available on short notice, short duration, outdoor, not just indoor. So the same band being licensed in two different ways, but at fairly low value, to the person acquiring.
Well, certainly low cost, if not low. I think Matt, you've got a view on that band as well.
Yes, very much so. I think the key for us and the industries we're looking at, both media and entertainment, and stadiums and events, and also very similar requirements for PPDR, public protection and disaster relief. So the key across all of this, so I've only, although I've known the guys at Neutral Wireless, I've only just come back in with them, and the key is the agility there on software-defined radio. We came out of Strathclyde University, Strath SDR. So pretty much anything can be tuned, but we could work this anywhere in many countries. But obviously, the elephant in the room always is spectrum. And And I spoke with Ofcom about this previously when we looked, and I realised I had to fill a paper form out and send it to Ofcom, 3 months potentially to get a yes. Even worse, 3 months to get a no. And that's just not sustainable if we're looking at this. Yes, it maybe if you're looking at a port, but when you're looking at events that may come up. So with the N40 band, being able to get a yes or a no in the spectrum in days as opposed to months absolutely just totally changes the ability to be able to do
I think they're aiming
things.
at 3 days, right? And which is obviously an improvement over the 6 weeks they claim they can do it in for the N77 band. But although I have to say we've applied for a number of N77 licenses now, and we tend to find that they're getting better. It's still the same sort of mechanical, process, but it's, I think if they can tweak that a little bit and get faster access to spectrum, that will really unlock a lot of.
And I think the thing here is that the private networks come at a variety of sizes and a variety of timescales. So sizes, you can have one small cell, or you can have a whole rail network or utility grid or something like that. And from timescales, you might have 1 day for an event or a festival, or even 1 hour for peaks and stuff like that, for true pop-ups, through to 5 or 10 years for an enterprise, and possibly 30 years for a utility company. And so
Exactly.
you've orders of magnitude, and I don't think you can get one regulatory regime to deal with 5-6 orders of magnitude of time.
Exactly. And
There's
this
a
was
good
very,
menu
very
of
pragmatic.
opportunities now in the UK for that. Yeah.
Sorry, Mansoor.
No, just to add to that, it's absolutely right. And, Matt has got a good point. By the time we had separate spectrum at the events were really audio events that were temporary. And so we were giving out thousands of those licenses a year. We had some very interesting debates with Philip on this, because I was always trying to push the limits, and Philip was a very pragmatic guy. We talked about this, about saying, how fast can we be? I was very much pushing for dynamic spectrum, at the kind of 10-meter level. And he said, well, there's no need for that. There's no demand. And he was right at the time. So effectively said, look, let's start with this now. And it's already a big improvement, 6 weeks compared to what you had before. Let's start with that now. And as the demand increases, then we'll adjust the system, and we can effectively get to more dynamic systems because the technology is going to improve as well. So that was the plan anyway from the beginning.
And I think we get to more dynamic over time. I mean, in some cases, so the US SAS system is much more dynamic, but then it's also much more costly and complicated, and involves sensor networks and things like that. So I think it's quite good that we're sort of continuing to iterate. But actually, coming back to what Nanda was saying before about we want to get to hundreds of thousands of networks. I mean, I'm not quite sure how we're going to count the ones which pop up for a day and then disappear. Do we count it? Does that count towards his target?
Depends on whether we want to tick numbers. We'll hype it up for you. We'll get some.
KPI, so it has to count.
Yeah, keep a count of how many events there are. Okay. Are there, in your view, particular verticals or sectors or use cases which the UK seems to be over-indexing on? Is it events and sports and things like that? Is it public sector or local government maybe, or something else? Well, I don't know. Any of you got any thoughts on that?
We see a huge range. I think there's no one vertical that wins. I mean, the broadcast stuff is really interesting, and we see fantastic. And if I combine broadcast with events that pop up, temporary use cases, there are loads of them. Some of these partners of ours will take radios literally around the country, and they'll book their licenses in advance because they know the events grid throughout the year. But of course, we're not allowing for news gathering, because news by its nature could be, it's happening now. We don't have time for Ofcom. So there's a regulatory issue there, but most people are planning ahead. They plan their project, their infrastructure build. It's not just the radios; it's all the other stuff that goes in as well.
Yeah, I suspect that sort of ad hoc news gathering, which could be also citizen news, or frankly, could be an Instagram streamer, is probably more in the wheelhouse of the sort of network APIs and, dare I say, slicing. I don't know, I'm a slicing skeptic, but that's one of the use cases, especially because it's often outdoors.
Well, yes, and I was, the whole reason that our industry got into private 5G is, the fact that network slicing wasn't there. I was working BT. So BT Sport had, media and broadcast. They had a broadcasting network. They had a rights holder They had the largest mobile network and the largest fixed network in the country. And if the complexities, slicing was talked about, and we all sort of bought into it, and then it was not there, and we'd already said, well, we need to use this. Everyone's waiting, or we'll do it ourselves. And then Neutral Wireless were already doing this. But I do think one of my concerns with all of this really is how the spectrum is actually going to be managed. I've always had massive concerns of a land grab. Someone just goes, okay, well, we know this and this is going to be happening, and then actually you're taking out. So I don't know, BBC News buy up lots of areas, they know what's going on, and then how do ITN come in this? And I think that's where you get an integrator is great, because we did the King's Coronation over private 5G all down the Mall, and we brought in all of the broadcasters, so European broadcasters, so everyone can use it. So there's almost shared network involved in some of this, and who runs it? Who runs this type of network in a network, if you like?
That's really interesting, because I was going to ask a question anyway about the link between private networks and neutral host, but I hadn't thought that you could have essentially a shared neutral host network between multiple private networks on the same site on the same frequency, but actually sharing it, with whether it's Mochen or whatever it is. That's actually I think that as private networks become more common, we're going to have to deal with different coexistence models where there are, whether it's an airport where you've got one in the cargo terminal and one in the maintenance hangar and one on the main apron or something like that. And do you separate it on a spectrum basis, or that type of thing? Anyone else has come across that sort of approach?
Well, we have that working in our lab right now.
All right.
And we are looking at possible trial of that later this year. That ability to host multiple, in this case, we're doing it via PLMNs on a single carrier, whether that's a neutral host PLMN, so Virgin Mobile, for example, or it could be one or a number of private PLMNs on the same carrier. We have the luxury here in the UK of being able to get easy access to 100 megahertz of bandwidth in the N77 band. So great opportunity there to provide, that type of solution.
Stephen, I saw you indicate something there.
Thanks, Steve. Leading on from what I was saying is, yes, we've actually done this for real. A good example is the events and festivals, which, by the way, you can't serve those with slices. It's usually rural. The network's there, who supports time users and things. So basically, it has to be private, and being able to do IoT, the push to the kind of like the terminals, point of sale terminals, as well as emergency services on the same network. So that's already been rolled many times by some of our solution partners. So they're quite different demands. Point of sale versus push to talk radios on the same network with the 5 QIs, the quality of service tags that they want, and multiple cells and diversity and diverse uplinks to make sure it's solid and reliable.
I was just going to add to that is, so we take a stadium use case was great. Everybody said we'll put private 5G in there, and the broadcasters can have it, and that's great. And we already know it's perfect for remote production, freedom of movement, creative opportunities. However, you look at a stadium, what's required in there, and I think we have to have 3 levels, and I'm pushing this quite a lot. You have a neutral host, so someone like shared access will come in, and that's the bowl, that's the public, that's how they get theirs. You have Wi-Fi because you've got corporate boxes, you've got offices in lots of these stadiums, and then for the I guess the operational network that needs mobile will be private 5G. But so that's great, and we look at this, but you put in a private 5G, and what it can't be is you've got it now, stadium owner, club, you just go and use it. What you actually have to look at is, okay, we want, let's say RefCam, because that's a good example. Or you put in a private 5G for that. Okay, That's fine. Now we want security layer. So we want all our security teams to have access. Now we can't, that needs to be a service within that private 5G. So you add that on. Okay, our broadcasters want this. So right, okay, you got the broadcast package, and you start to make this a solutions network, not you throw it in like you would Wi-Fi and everybody goes on there, because otherwise you're just going to end up a best effort network for operations. So it needs to be a lot of there's a lot of complexity now. We're closer to the fact that, yes, everybody can make private 5G work. How do we make the services work together?
Mansoor, I saw you.
Yeah, no, just following on to what Matt said. Today, if we were to do Wembley Stadium, we would do it totally differently. We've got the tools to do it differently. And what you were saying there, I mean, we talk a lot about AI, and I'm the last person to build on the hype of AI, but there is a new ecosystem that's evolving. And I can see many gateway providers, SaaS providers or service provider as a service, they're providing AI functions built into the gateways that are then plugged into the network. And that includes service chaining, building on what was, IMS, as well as, the new gateway-enabled KPIs that we have in camera. So effectively, it's a box that you can effectively load lots of services. And that's where we need to get to. On the enterprise level, what you've got is the private 5G network can be like a GPU in the sense that it's got the processing there, but it's also got the gateway aspect, so you can actually plug in third parties locally and have the content there. And then you can also have very strong local authorization and authentication, so that you can allow locally, if it's an enterprise network, you can allow them access to all your files securely locally, and then plug that into the AI systems in a way you can't do anywhere. That's massive. That's the way we're going to scale. On the consumer front, that's exciting enough, but on the consumer front, nobody's ever spoken about consumer here yet. I'm the first person to always challenge it there. What I'm seeing is the consumer market is saturated. You need to differentiate. You need to personalize. And many, many more operators are launching MVNO type brands. So they're like MVNOs within the operator. You've had that in the US. We did it in the Philippines for Gen Z. Now, to personalize those services, you need to give them something extra. And having these small pockets of private networks where you offer extra services is the key, because then you can plug in services that are adapted to just one type of customer and delight our customers. We really need to be focusing on AI on what we're giving to the customer and not on what we're doing to improve the network, because that conversation is going on forever.
I was going to come back to that. My next question are the touch points between AI and private 5G, but just on that idea of sort of almost like consumer level, I wonder if at some point we end up with essentially, well, actually potentially unlicensed private 5G. Although there's a device support issue, but there's no reason why you couldn't run a small cell in 5 gigahertz or 6 gigahertz, unlicensed spectrum, or even 60 gigahertz millimeter wave. I just wonder if at some point you'll walk in somewhere, there'll be a QR code with download an eSIM for the free 5G hotspot. But I think the device support and persuading the device guys to put that 3GPP band in is going to be an interesting challenge.
I don't think Spectrum is the issue for this, but I do hope that we won't even have to look at the QR code. It should be all automatic. It should be effectively detect the user coming in. What's beautiful is that these AI systems, they use local video and local real time to enhance the service for users. And that's a huge privacy and security risk. But if you're doing it on a private network locally, that gives you a lot more flexibility to get the consent and do it.
So do you see AI having more of a role for the operational management and the initial setup and ongoing configuration of a private network? Or is the private, if you like, is it AI for private networks or private networks for AI, or to be honest, AI for the regulator?
But as I said, I think the big picture is the AI private networks as the GPU for AI for enterprise and specific cases. So for me, I think the operational aspect is very important, but it's nothing more than a continuation of the BAU that we've been doing. It's just a question of just getting better and better algorithms. It's not that exciting.
It's mostly ML rather than Gen AI.
Exactly. What's really exciting is in real time being able to intercept the flow in your network, which only the operators can do. In real time, intercepting the flow, and based on your personal considerations, changing your voice or changing the video with your consent. And for example, I'm working with one startup that will be in Barcelona with. What they can do is with just a gesture, you can I can look sad, and you'll hear violins playing in the background.
To be honest, the voice and AI and voice is something I've been doing a lot of work on, and there's whether you put AI into the media path, or whether it's around the metadata, or whether it's historic with vCons. I mean, 11 Labs IPO'd last week at $11 billion valuation.
They're only 3 years old.
Oh yeah, exactly. Park that one for a second though. Yeah, sort of Stephen, Alex, where Matt, where do you see AI fitting here? Is it about is it the AI use cases that are
2
driving?
minutes, guys.
Well,
okay.
Yeah. AI needs to come in and play a role in terms of reducing the complexity and the operational cost of running the network, because mobile networks are inherently complicated and certainly are perceived to be a lot more complicated than your sort of Wi-Fi network or whatever. So they can definitely play a role there, which will promote more scale and use of 5G private networks. But I think they're also very important, play a very important role. The network will play a very important role in being the bedrock on which you build that AI infrastructure. And it should be, I think, coming back to a point I think that Mansoor was just making, is it needs to be something that's just sat in the background, quietly humming away. Nobody talks about the network anymore. They talk about the services that are flowing over that network, and that is very important to get these 5G private networks to that level where that is truly the case. It's not today. Let's be honest, but that is the vision of what we're trying to do, is trying to get networks to that point where there's something that you switch on and it hums in the corner and everybody's happy because they've got connectivity.
Yeah. I mean, I suspect there's probably an AI for security angle here as well. Stephen, I know you talked a little bit about it earlier on.
I was going to add exactly to the comments there. So AI in the background. So to make networks simple, to scale to get to the 500,000 networks, we need AI to make it simple. So this becomes literally plug and go. Absolutely in the background. There's AI at the application level. So this AI at the application level will cause the networks to grow. There'll be new applications, new cool things we can do with it. Users will say, I need private 5G because I'm using AI. Like the driverless transport we've got live in Milton Keynes with our partners. We've got minibuses carrying people on public roads. It's AI. The private 5G enables that.
Yeah, same again. You know, it's really if you want to use AI machine learning to make your operations in terms of how your network runs, yeah, great. That's an evolution of technology. But I would say that it's the bedrock that drives new applications.
I'm getting hassled by Nanda here, so I'm going to say thank you very much to all of you, and I'm going to hand it back and really appreciate the panel. Thanks, all of you.
Very quickly, say
one thing. Thank you, everyone.
Is that we're going to Mobile World Congress. We're taking our 5G plane. It's a lightweight plane at the entrance to the FIRA. It's bright orange. Come and have a chat.
Take a flight.
Great.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nanda, over
Not
to you.
sponsored by EasyJet, is it?
Yeah, it's big. Yeah.
The orange one. Okay, super. So before we move on to our next session, I have with me here Martin Green of Ataya, and he's an old stalwart of the community as well. So this is a community event. So since he's here, I'm going to give him 5 minutes to tell you all why, if you're at MWC, you want to pop down and meet them as well. Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nanda. I guess there's going to be a brief introduction to who Ataya are. I feel compelled to do that. Many of you on the call probably know me already. I spent some time at Cellnex and with Benatel, but for about the last 12 months, I've been working with Ataya, really exciting company. So in a nutshell, we are a software company, a software innovation company. Our primary product, for want of a better phrase, is a core, 3GPP core. We like to think we're a little bit different. You may have come across Harmony. Harmony is it's the core that we first brought to market about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's a universal connectivity platform. And what I mean by that is that as well as managing private 5G, we can also bring Wi-Fi and LAN onto the same core. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, scalability, but also it works very well with sort of legacy or incumbent technologies that you might have for connectivity. The other important element of that is the zero trust network access security layer we have. So ZTNA, I think, is something which is coming more and more probably mandated, I think, as security policies mature. And they obviously we have a constant risk from a cyber perspective. So ZTNA security is very close to our hearts, and actually this is pretty much our sort of front foot forward on that. And then probably about, I'd say 3 years ago, we realized that the markets, and I think you came onto it earlier, Stephen, simplicity is really what drives people's decision making. And of course, private networks still have this, this, I suppose, perception. They're very complex. So what we did is we took our core software and installed it down into an agent, which can be deployed actually on the radio itself. And we call that Chorus. We've done this with CableFree. We've done this with Mostly Networks and several other radio vendors. What it means is that you can have your entire private network on site. The cloud management platform, which you get with Chorus, allows controller management to be done in the cloud, but your user plane data is on site, which brings many advantages. So that's been very successful. Chorus is becoming, I guess, the platform of choice for a lot of systems integrators. The next evolution, which is quite exciting, is what we're going to be showing at MWC, is logical step now with looking at how we can really address AI, and a lot of the AI demands of particularly physical AI are going to be sort of edge compute. So we're working with Vantech, which is it's a platform, it's a hardware platform where we have CPU and GPU combined. So the CPU hosts the software core, and then we're doing inferencing using the NVIDIA chips and the GPUs. So this is something which is very exciting. We can show you all about this. All about that at MWC. So come and see us. If you want to learn more, link in with me, send me a message, and I'll see you there.